Hey guys, welcome to Simply Unconventional. I'm Carl Haskins, and I will be discussing some key elements to our first show here on YouTube. It's kind of exciting for me because I like challenges, and this is one of the challenges that I decided to take on next. And really, we're going to delve into the topic of my journey to becoming a Green Beret, and we're going to talk a little bit about what I did afterwards. And really, this show is really designed to get you to think outside the box and utilize some of these skill sets that I'm going to show you or teach you throughout our journey together. And we're going to talk about key topics such as leadership, self-defense, maybe home defense, mental health and wellness, and tackle some of today's most challenging issues. Why don't you guys come along this journey with me and we'll get into it. So really my journey starts off as a fairly poor kid in the city of Niagara Falls, New York. I had a mother that had me when she was 16 years old. My father left when I was 3 months old, roughly. And we grew up in poverty for the most part. We did have some challenges along the way. My mother had some struggles. My brother and sister had their struggles, as did I. And sometimes we didn't have food, sometimes we didn't have hot water, sometimes we didn't have electricity, and yet here I am still today. And I find that all those things have been a blessing and a gift to me. When I was 12 years old, I used to hang out with my Uncle Chris, who was about 5 years older than me. I would do anything to be hanging out with him. He still lived with my grandmother. One night, I told my mother a lie. I told her that my Uncle Chris was outside waiting to take me to my grandmother's house so I can spend the night over there. When the reality was that he was not outside and they didn't even know I was coming. My mother said, yeah, go ahead. You're good. You can spend the night there. And then I began my roughly 5-mile walk to my grandmother's house. The interesting thing is it was getting pretty dark out at this point. And by the time that I got roughly 3 blocks away from my grandmother's house, I remember this fairly big man come up next to me, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. He was smoking a cigarette with his right hand. And so I immediately got incredibly nervous, and I looked at him and he asked me a question, hey, where you going, kid? Being panicked and all, I looked at a house that had a light on that was right to the left of me. I said, right there. And then I kind of started trying to cut through the grass. And when I said that, the man took his cigarette, and I'll never forget it, flicked it in the air, and I remember seeing that orange ember, brighten and flicker and hit the ground and skip. And as I started walking towards the grass, he scooped me up, captured one of my arms underneath, and I had one free arm. And he started to take me across the street. Well, across the street was like an apartment building, more like an older folks home kind of thing. And then there was a direct path that led to an alley. And then behind the alley were some really high grass. And I think that's where he's taken me at this point. So I started screaming and crying as loud as I could and yelling. And I'll never forget this. As the man was carrying me away, I was looking back at that house with the light on. And a woman looked out of her window, pulled her curtain back and looked, and then immediately shut it. And I seen no action from that person's observation of me being abducted. So as the man's carrying me across the street, I start striking as hard as I could with my free hand. Must have caught him dead center in his groin because he dropped me. When he dropped me straight onto my forehead. And I remember seeing sparks go off of my head, and I was like really woozy, and I didn't even kind of know what was going on at that point. As I started to get up, I looked up and the guy was running, and I was like, felt incredibly blessed and fortunate that happened. And so I got up, brushed myself off, and I finished the 3-block walk to my grandmother's house. When I went inside the house, my grandmother was shocked and seen this huge goose egg bump on my head, and she's like, oh my God, what happened? And I told her, I said, well, I fell and hit my head on a pole. And it took me until I was teaching a women's self-defense class many years later. These women had been involved in some pretty bad things, and they were very nervous around men. And I remember sharing this story with them, and I didn't tell them it was me until the end. I think that helped me connect with these women on a level that otherwise I could not have. But my grandmother believed me, and I never told anybody until I was roughly about 32 years old. It just blows my mind that I went that many years. But I really believed that was the foundation to what started me off on this journey of wanting to do something more and better. As I moved along, I played sports in high school, did all that kind of stuff. I wasn't the fastest, I wasn't the biggest, I wasn't the strongest, any of those kind of things. And when I graduated high school, didn't have the discipline to complete my college courses. I'd rather go play basketball or talk to girls or different things like that. At that point in my life, I had experienced a lot of things growing up, from the poverty side, wearing hand-me-downs. I had experienced some traumas. I was sexually assaulted as a kid at one point. All those things could have easily broken me and broken my spirit, and it partially did my brother and sister at that time. And they really struggled. They both dropped out of high school. They didn't do well afterwards for quite a while until later on. Next thing you know, I found myself having signed up to go into the Army Reserve, and at which point I tested pretty highly on it, and I became a surgical technician. Well, when I was going through my rotations, everybody kept telling me, you should go active duty and become an Army Ranger, not really knowing fully what that all encompassed. To summarize this, I ended up getting married. I had 3 kids, and I was about 22 to 23 years old. And I decided that because I wasn't doing too well financially, I decided to go active duty. And I went what they call 11 X-ray. As an 11 X-ray, you don't really have a defined position within the Army. While I was in basic training, I took a PT test along with a couple other guys. Well, with a lot of other guys. 2 other guys scored extremely high in the PT test like I did. This big, strong, black man with a black beret. Back then, black berets were only for Ranger Regiment. And he had a big dip in his mouth and said, boy, ever think about being an Army Airborne Ranger? And I didn't really know what to say to him. I said, well, he said, sign me up. And once I graduated the infantry basic, I went straight to airborne school, and then I went and graduated RIP, the Ranger Indoctrination Program. I really want to get into that transition from going into Ranger Battalion and how amazing that experience was for me, because it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. The Ranger Indoctrination Program was incredibly intense, and it was a 30-day selection process, and I'll never forget how proud I was when I put that black beret on and my first Ranger Battalion scroll on, and then I went on to become an Army Ranger. So a part of that process, I was exposed to other things. One of those, I believe it was in October of '94, somewhere around that time frame, we got an alert, and then we ended up going out to the USS America on Blackhawks to go in, and our job was we were going to take down the Palace in Haiti because it was being overrun at that point. And all set to go, and then we got the stand down call because of Jimmy Carter and him negotiating a peace deal at that particular time. So a trip that we were supposed to be 3 days on this aircraft carrier ended up being a 45-day trip, and at the end of the day, that was crazy. I got to do KP, FOD walkdowns, different things, but those experiences all added to who I started to become as a person. And when I got back from that trip, I realized I needed something else. I needed more, and I wanted to be exposed to something different. And for me, I had 2 jobs in mind. One was going to be a underwater dive guy, deep sea underwater guy in the Army, or I was thinking about becoming a Green Beret in Army Special Forces. And I just happened to have one of my guys that had just came back, and he got selected, and he told me, do it. You could do it. I ended up going ahead and taking on that challenge. Went on to graduate the Q course and the qualification course. And that whole process took quite some time. I ended up getting Arabic as my primary language. I was an 18 Echo, which is a communications sergeant, and that journey really led me to be someone who had a bunch of different skills. I already had a really good medical background. I'd already did a lot of the advanced trauma life support stuff, and I did a whole bunch of stuff, so I was a very well-rounded soldier. Becoming a Green Beret was pretty important because that really opened my eyes up to so much more and the potential that every person has, and that whole unconventional mindset and how to solve problems outside the box, approach things differently instead of taking everything on. Once I went through a lot, spent about 4 years in Iraq, total, been to Afghanistan, been to about 32 countries throughout that time frame. Got to travel the world, got to hang out with some world leaders, got to be a troop sergeant major for a specialized unit that focuses on hostage rescue, counter-terrorism, got to help develop a combatives program that was taught to every kind of 3-letter agency and elite military unit and a lot of different civilians along the way. And I really spent a lot of time developing programs in instruction, from low-vis tactics courses to running advanced urban combat courses. I really developed a lot of different experiences. So now I'm going to move real quickly into my post-military career, which is in and of itself kind of crazy the way I approached it. And when I got out, I had a lot of opportunities to be leaders of different types of military government contracting organizations, and or being a contractor or doing the same thing, making a ton of money doing things that I was already really good at. But as I mentioned, this video is about unconventional. And so the first job I took when I got out, I became a general manager of an unbuilt, unfinished movie theater. So I got to help with the build process in the movie theater. Learned a ton during that process about construction and on-site project management. Then I went on to build and staff 130, or I believe it was 151 staff members for a movie theater, for a 9-screen theater, the largest screen in Southern Arizona at that time. I wanted a challenge. I wanted to do something that I was not familiar with and that made me kind of uncomfortable. So, and I had a blast. It was one of my favorite things I've ever done, is run that movie theater. The owners were phenomenal, and I really learned a lot throughout that process. Then I went on to become a senior project manager for the largest car wash company in the world, which in and of itself, that whole project management thing, I'm not a project manager, but turns out you can do that if you have the background that a Green Beret has. For a short period of time, just prior to COVID, I ran a special events planning company that kind of does everything from Final Fours to Super Bowl kind of things to a whole bunch of different types of entertainment venue stuff, security and parking and all those kind of things. And then I also became a program director for a nonprofit that helped struggling veterans that were, having issues with PTSD and other things. So my background is, as you can tell, quite diverse. I also owned and operated 3 companies. And I enjoy starting and running businesses. I might be a serial entrepreneur, I don't know. This is going to kind of be another offset to that. So this channel is really going to be focused on coming at you with unconventional thought process, giving you ideas that are outside the box. And again, we're going to be talking about leadership, mental toughness, warrior mindset, some things that every single person can use, man, woman, or child, can use these skill sets that I'm going to be talking about throughout this video series. I just want to thank you guys so much for being here. My next video is really going to talk about some core leadership principles and things that you can do to better manage your teams if you're a leader inside of your organization, and some little inside tricks that I would use to help develop my teams and build my teams as I was going throughout my process of growth. And again, thank you very much, and I hope that I'll see you next time.